Hello and welcome. This is the Climate Talk podcast. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and it's my pleasure to bring you yet another episode of the Climate Talk podcast. What we do on the Climate Talk podcast is we have conversations about climate change, climate action, climate finance, climate justice, everything around the climate space, and also about climate education, which will be the focus of the conversation today. If you're listening for the first time, please feel free to check out other episodes that we have. We have over 30 episodes recorded and available for you. You can find them on the website, which is www.climatetalkpodcast.com. You can also find it on all your podcast streaming platforms, from iTunes to Google Podcasts to iHeartRadio to Amazon Music. Everywhere you find podcasts, you definitely will find the Climate Talk podcast. And if you have questions or if you want to be a part of this podcast in any way, feel free to reach out to me. My email is Seyi@climatetalkpodcast.com. Seyi is spelled SEYI @climatetalkpodcast.com. Today, we will do a lot more talk around education. And this is very important because when we talk about climate change, one component that is largely missing is the component of education. What exactly is this climate change? How much do people know about it? But if you also think of education in a different context, how exactly is the knowledge level that people have? What kind of skills do people have? What exactly are the nuances? What are the conversations we need to have about what happens in our education space? So this conversation will be largely around education, a bit of global context, a bit of the African context, and maybe some splash around climate education. My guest today is Semiye Michael. I call him my big brother. He's one of my mentors who's been holding my hands and showing me the path through the years. He is the founder of Dean Initiative, but beyond that, he wears so many caps. He is also the initiator of the Global Goal Community Center, where we're recording this podcast today. He's also been leading the big education conversations, where he focuses a lot on climate education, skill-based education, transforming education. And some of that is what we'll be discussing today. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, Seyi, and it's a pleasure having to do this with you. I've been following the podcast a long time, and finally, it's my turn to be on the podcast.
Absolutely, and I'm very excited because I think in a few months from now, we will switch roles. You will be the one leading a podcast and I will be a guest on it.
Yeah, I'm excited about that new journey, and definitely you will also be my guest.
Absolutely. So I love to also pass the mic to my guest to know who exactly is my guest. So can you please tell me what's your name? What do you do?
So my name is Semiye Michael. It's kind of a long journey here from the private sector and to the development sector, and having to learn so much within the education sector, leading me to my role in climate education champion, and working with a number of partners who are interested in climate education action. And we've led a number of initiatives to support the mainstreaming of climate education as a major action against climate change into our school curriculum here in Nigeria and in some part of Africa.
Interesting. And let's start off with the broader concept of education before we narrow down to climate education. You come from Nigeria, one of Africa's most populated countries. There was a time it was in the news that 13 million out-of-school children are out there. And this was puzzling. Some people, contested the figure, maybe less, maybe more. But what is obvious is that education seems not to be a priority in Africa, or if we have to narrow it down, in Nigeria. Do you really see this? Is this also the lens through which you see or you understand?
Yeah, I have a different perspective to it entirely, because for me, we've measured the number of people that have access to school as against the number of people who uses school as a tool for change. And, we can have the entire continent, accessing school and going to school and training and still doesn't change anything, because even by measure, if we continue to measure the number of people in Africa, in Nigeria, Uganda, Botswana, that have access to school but have not used whatever the school has imparted in them to, catalyze change in their environment, then we begin to ask the questions of what exactly does school do to people? And that's the big questions I have worked on as a person. So for me, much more is the number of people who uses school as a catalyst for change, or the few who, after having access to education, have been able to become a change agent, changing their society, having access to innovative mind that provides solutions. And that centers on what form of skills does school pass on to people that pass through it. That's the big question for us. Even though, we advocate that everybody have access to go to school, but what have we benefited from the number of people, the population of children or young people, adults who have passed through schools in Africa? What has changed through their exposure to school?
So if you had to answer this question that you just posed, what are the main things that you think school should supply or should present to people who come into this body?
So school evidently is meant to be an architect of societal transformation. School is meant to board, change habits. School is meant to pass on the ability to invent solutions into people's life. School is expected, to build people's unconsciousness to become, a living aspect of them that births solutions. In a situation where school becomes enabler for individual to survive for the benefit of themselves and themselves alone, the purpose of school may or can be said to have been defeated, such as we see in Africa. So we see people using education as a means of personal economic delivery, personal economic breakthrough. So you get to school, or you are sent to school, or you are encouraged to go to school to deliver yourself from poverty and not to deliver the society. And so it becomes a race against the rest of the people, as against a race for the people. And that is why we keep having the number of problems we have in our society today. Because everyone who is empowered through school is raising for himself and taking all the advantages for themselves. And that is why corruption is battered.
I'll jump in here. You made a very important point that also makes me think about education outside the four walls of the school. We have this indigenous knowledge. We have ways in which we measure education, say 50 years before we have this architecture of school in places like Nigeria. And maybe with that, we could also reflect on the aspect of soft skills, which is also, contemporary type of education outside of the classroom, which people learn, behind their desk or in other formats. So what are your opinions about education outside of the classroom?
This is going back to where to our forefathers who built the world we inherited. These audacious individuals built a world that didn't see the type of education we have today. Yet they delivered a world to us that provided us safety, that provided us, most of the infrastructures that we see, today, the kind of abilities that are inherent in us. And then you begin to ask, what exactly is today's school built for? Knowledge or ability to solve problems. And that is the concept of soft skill. And that's what we advocate. Okay, so the world is not a place where everybody has to know the same thing. The world is a place where even what the few knows become beneficial to all. And that's what is lacking in our contemporary education design. And, Africa is such, I don't know how to describe it, but I think we are so gullible. Okay, believing that the design of the Western education passed on to us is what the Western society still operates. The Western society passed a form of education to us that is expected to develop our ability to evolve, because they are evolving in their education design. As a matter of fact, a regular country in Europe will change or overhaul their school curriculum time to time to meet up with the reality of time. But a common African country, you see the kind of curriculum they operate that has lasted for more than 30 years, and you will see only tiny changes in them that does not speak to what is happening in their own context and environment today. How do we grow if we continue to sink our mindset to live in 50 years ago while we live in today's world?
This brings to mind, lesson notes that I saw my teachers from primary school to universities use, and those lesson notes have seen hell. They've gone through many lives and battles. He still flips it through and says, today's lesson is, and it tells us what it was taught 10, 15 years ago. So this also brings to mind the need for us to redesign our curriculum. And maybe we can then intersect the concept of the climate education drive that you've been doing.
Thank you so much.
As part of the need to redesign our curriculum, can we then find a place for climate education, considering how climate change is topical in our world today?
So for me, when we started this conversation around climate education, I have an opinion that not one of, but as a matter of fact, the strongest tool that can be used in acting against climate change is education. Because if the action of men causes the chaos we see within our climate, ecosystem, the only thing that can undo it is also the action of men that are programmed intentionally. And the only institution that is structurally designed to affect the mind of man, is the school system. The change, either short or long term, on climate activities will have to start from the school. We have to use education as a deliberate design to rework the mind of man. Because a natural man is capable of destroying himself, and that's what we've been doing to ourselves over time, taking profit over collective good. And that's what I said. What has school done to us? Individual reason for themselves as against individual reason for our collective good. So climate education becomes very, very critical. As a matter of fact, we believe, and research has also proven this, that what climate education will do in a very short time, the total amount of investment the entire UN is advocating for in terms of climate finance and every other thing, climate education will do it in far lesser time, because collectively men will begin to take responsibility for the actions they do. Consciousness will be there, children will be involved. And one thing I've also seen and have learned is that children have more systemic way to change the world than even the adults. They are more deliberate, they are more conscious. When we had our hygiene education program, when we went across schools, delivered a deliberate and intentional hygiene classes with students, inbuilt actions into them, helping children know how to hold their parents and adults around them accountable on what they do around hygiene educations in their neighborhood. It shocks us when we began to get feedbacks from parents how their children began to stalk them, as in hunting them down on every hygiene behavior that is against the ethics of what they were taught in the hygiene classes. And we began to receive calls, and wow, this is how more children can act as change agents when proper education is passed to them through deliberate curriculum. So what then do you think will happen if we now redesign the concept of our approach to climate education, as against some of the argument that most Ministry of Education and teachers argue that, oh, we already have a climate education built in what we teach, weather is there. Do you understand what we are facing in this?
And right here, you sort of answered the next set of questions I wanted to ask. It's about the strongholds in the system. People that have been in this system for a while, they're contented with the way it is, and they do not see a need for us to introduce any change. How do you think we can navigate these strongholds?
Man, it's really crazy. And you can really imagine what someone like me have faced with some people in government trying to make you look stupid when you are just trying to make them see that change is imminent. There's nothing we can do against change. And as a matter of fact, when you are being counseled to explore an alternative, you are not being insulted. As a matter of fact, you are being supported, you are being empowered, because like Chimamanda said, when you continue to focus on life through single line stories, you also kill the opportunity of exploring or seeing life in a different dimension and angle. And that's what we argue, that okay, when you think what you are doing, we are insulting you for thinking you have not been doing what is right, you've closed the opportunity of any form of change to it. And that's not what that's not how life is going to function. So when teachers get hungry, when Ministry of Educations are, they continue to refuse, the approach of looking at climate education in a comprehensive manner, but continue to look at it with a very narrow, narrow scope with which they've continued to look at it. We say you keep endangering the world, and I can't even emphasize this enough. We need to bring children on board through intentional climate education design. We need to get to the elementary school, we need to get to senior schools, we need to get to higher institutions. We need to change and infiltrate education system with a deliberate climate action education design.
Absolutely, absolutely. And maybe one thing that you've not mentioned, which I want you to reflect on, is about this being deliberate in climate education and the approach, is the aspect of indigenous context. And by indigenous context, I mean indigenous language, I mean indigenous examples. It's very funny when I see people in Nigeria talk about climate change and they show slides of polar bears and melting ice. And I wonder, why can't we associate the flooding and the desertification and the deforestation and the many practical things that we see around us? Why can't we associate this with climate change?
We also have the issue of, the globalization of every issue based on single line context. Young people are restless. They want to identify with something. They want to be part of a discussion. They just want to be there. And the issue is, what exactly are you there doing? Okay, so somebody in Finland who happens to have a louder platform and engagement is talking about climate action and is demonstrating based on what is affecting them in their own locality. But because he is generating traction, traffic, and it's being hard, and you are just in one corner in Nigeria, what is affecting you is food shortage as a result of increased, temperature that you also can discuss. But hey, no.
Or flooding.
Yeah. So, exactly.
Even the heat and then all the things that is being stored.
Insecurity as a result of, cattle, clash between the struggle with the scarce, green leaves around your neighborhood and it's killing everybody. So, but no, you want to flow with what is popular that some guy in Europe is shouting about. So some people will just say these guys are not serious. And that's why the government most times even don't take our struggle seriously, because they are more exposed than we do, they know more than we do, and then when what we are talking about and what seems to even gain more traction on the social media, they know they are not the issues that we face. They just say, these guys, they just want to yeah. So in the right way, I think we had an example in our centers few months back, where we had some women in some communities lamenting seriously about their farm produce, and then we thought, what can we do? So we went to them and we sat with them in that entire community. All of them didn't go to farm that day, and we began to ask them questions. How did your harvest used to yield before? When did it change? What were the things you noticed? They began to cite issues of rainfall. They began to cite issues of invading of their farms by cattle. They began to cite issues of the drainage, irrigation issues that they have, and we began to connect the dots for them systematically, for them to by themselves realize how to link the entire process into what they will now understand as impact of climate change. And then one woman shouted, I heard these people shouting climate change, climate change. I said, no, it cannot be something for us. Now confessing that, okay, this is why we have been. I said, okay, how about climate education and communication coming to everybody within the context of their own vicinity and locality? That is allowing people to, through a constructive and deliberate programming, know how what you are talking about in terms of climate change relates to them, not within the science and the global factor you are discussing it, but within the framework of what is happening at their doorstep, and bringing them to because before we left that community that day, they began to also suggest alternative solutions that are homegrown.
Exactly.
By themselves.
And that's what we miss out on when we give them the very imported story.
Exactly.
That one-sided view.
Exactly.
They really cannot match up with it.
Yeah.
And when you were speaking, I also was reflecting on the context of this change in temperature.
Yeah.
Before they would know when to expect the rain, when to plant, how much rain would come.
Everything has changed.
All of this has changed.
Yeah.
But one thing you missed out on is the context of indigenous language. I'm very
for me, for somebody like me who lives in the neighborhood that I do not understand their language entirely, But yeah, I think one thing we have also done very well is to ensure that we know whatever we're designing is not actually entirely for us, but for the people, and what it is and what benefit will it be for if the people eventually do not, benefit from it. So we are deliberate in our indigenous partnership. So in fact, we have an initiative in our organization that we call Community Project Partnership, which makes, for every community we are working in, we co-design, co-implement together with them. So we will allow them to almost lead the shaping of the entire idea, and also put in place a system that will deliver the ownership to them in case when our projects, hence, there. So, and I think, wrapping up this way, the climate challenges that we have is more of indigenous and local challenges than it is national. It is the collective of the communities and locals that eventually turn into a national issue that we discuss.
Absolutely.
So when there is a climate disaster in one community, it can turn to a national headache. So when you take the action away from indigenous participation and concentration, you already are signing up for a national disaster, because it will come.
We don't want to sign up for a national disaster. We don't even want to sign up for an African-wide disaster. And this is why we need to prioritize climate education in every way we can. Semiye Michael, it's been nice speaking with you, but what do you think should be the take-home for the listener?
So the take-home for the listener should be, let us prioritize climate education. In fact, let's see it as our next big deal.
Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Semiye Michael. He is the brain behind the initiative and the initiator of the Global Goals Community Center. And we've been discussing about climate change, climate education, the need for indigenous knowledge, the need for involving people at the grassroots to bring about the solutions, and quite a lot of other things that we've been reflecting upon on this episode of the Climate Talk podcast. It's been really a pleasure having this chat with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Hope to catch up next time.
Absolutely. And that's the package of this episode. Feel free to check out other episodes and look out for the next episode. It's been a pleasure. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. Thanks to Olumide Edowu, thanks to Jimo and all the guys working at the end to make sure that you get new episodes every now and then. Until the next episode, bye for now and keep putting climate action.